This is the Great Vocal Majority Podcast. Hey everybody, Tony Cottaspati here, and this is the Great Vocal Majority Podcast, Volume 54, entitled Liberal Lemmings. As you may have heard, the House Intel Committee has found that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Although this will not end the speculation about the question, nor will it be the beginning of the end, we may say, with apologies to Sir Winston Churchill, that it is the end of the beginning. But what has been most astonishing throughout this investigation has really been the utter lack of any direct evidence that Trump had any collusion effort with the Russians. Despite the finding of the House committee, however, critics are still going to cry that it's partisan. Of course, that's just the way things are these days. It is true that the House committee is controlled by Republicans. Of course, everyone knows this. And Democrats have not been cowed into silence, however. I mean, God forbid. Representative Adam Schiff, the Democrat from California, has had an almost ubiquitous presence on broadcast and cable news with literally hundreds of appearances over the past 10 or 11 weeks alone. Most recently, when he was pressed to provide evidence of collusion, Schiff proved to be more evasive than forthcoming. There was good reason for it. There's no evidence. Anti-Trump, pro-Democrat news outlets like CNN and MSNBC continue to hammer the Trump-Russia collusion theme, but really to what end? Now, certainly, at this point, nobody questions that the Russians interfered in the 2016 presidential election. That's been established. And pretty much everyone is now in agreement on several key points, and I'm going to lay a few of them out here. The first one is that Russia interfered with the election, something they've done in the past. That's important to realize. Second, that the interference in 2016 was more intense than it had been previously. Nobody seems to argue with that anymore. Third, that Russia's primary focus leading up to the election was on undermining Hillary Clinton. And fourth, that the Russians switched their focus to Trump after the election was over and he won. And fifth, that there is no evidence to support the idea that Russian interference affected the election outcome. Those are 5 things that I believe pretty much everybody agrees. Now, Putin's goal was not really to affect the results of the election. Putin's mischief, rather, was to exploit partisanship. See, Putin sees partisanship in the United States right now as a weakness. It's a way to divide us. And boy, is he ever doing it. Putin hoped to exploit partisanship as a way of undermining the legitimacy of the election as a general proposition. Putin's actually agnostic as to who won because he had a no-lose situation on his hands. Americans were already divided. Hillary Clinton has always been a divisive figure, and to be perfectly honest, Donald Trump hasn't been a whole lot better. So both represented division, and Putin hoped to damage the winner. And that's key to note. He was thinking he was damaging the winner by going after Hillary Clinton. And he wanted to make governing difficult by amplifying the divisions. In other words, Putin was hoping to keep Americans divided and distracted, and that would allow him greater maneuverability to reestablish a new Russian empire in places like the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Now, it was not generally known or even obvious that Russia was, in effect, helping Trump by undermining Clinton. Still, even as rumors surfaced of Russian meddling, Obama, sensing any admission on his part could taint a Clinton victory, lied. Obama admonished Trump for his concerns about voting irregularities affecting the outcome. Remember that? Remember when Trump was not so sure he was going to accept the outcome of the election and everybody acted like their hair was on fire? Well, Obama dismissed that possibility. But he dismissed it not because it was the right thing to say, but because it was the politically right thing to say. It served to place Obama in a difficult position, this whole situation politically. On the one hand, he knew Russia was stepping up their interference efforts, but he also knew that making too much of it, making it too much of an issue, could spoil a Clinton win, which he thought was absolutely inevitable. His calculus was purely political. Really, it wasn't based on national security. And in his testimony before Congress, James Comey testified that Russian efforts to undermine Clinton had the effect of helping Trump. And that, I think people can say, and that is a truthful statement. But then Comey went further, and this was odd to me. He said that it also meant that Russia favored a Trump victory. Now that's a fallacious argument. It's fallacious because it's certainly true that in a two-person race, efforts to diminish or hurt one side is going to benefit the other. It's a bipolar arrangement. But it's wrong, however, to conclude that the efforts must be motivated by a desire to see the other side win. It could be the case, but it doesn't necessarily follow in any logical sense, because the other motives could be at play. In the case of Russian interference, the evidence does show that Russia was redirecting their efforts to undermine Trump after he was elected. They just spun on a dime and stopped going after Clinton and started going after Trump. It's clear that Russia's intentions were being directed at undermining whoever the president happened to be. Clinton was never expected to lose, so all of the Russian efforts took aim at Clinton because it only made sense. Comey's testimony reveals the bias he held, however. If Clinton was Putin's target, Trump being the chief beneficiary must have something to do with it. Now, Comey's biases were not expressed in a vacuum. They happened to occur in a hyper-partisan atmosphere and were picked up by a news media that is no longer impartial and is smarting over a humiliating loss of face with the surprising outcome of the 2016 presidential election. I mean, how many of these news pundits and anchors just laughed at the idea of Donald Trump winning the election? You know, you laugh at something and make a joke about it like it's never going to happen on national television over and over and over to hundreds of millions of people, and you end up with egg on your face at the end of it. That's not fun. The words of the FBI director, though, were presumed to have been impartial, although it's hard to understand how, since Comey was and still is vilified for reopening the Clinton email investigation a week and a half before the election, and the choice of what and when to believe James Comey seems rather selective by the media. But their motives are really self-serving, the media's that is. They're hoping to restore their own credibility by casting doubt on Trump's legitimacy. Now, this has wider implications as Clinton voters and never Trump Republicans rally around the theme, so far without any evidence, that Trump's presidency is illegitimate because it was stolen with Russian collusion. Russian interference in the election has morphed into collusion with the Trump campaign. Now, evidence of interference is being treated as a proxy for collusion. The news outlets are being dishonest when they advance such an argument. The end result is a certain form of groupthink hysteria. People on the left, led by politicians and the media, are drawing conclusions based only in suspicions and without any evidence. The rhetoric has become so heated. Evening cable news programs on CNN and MSNBC in particular have had their rhetoric result in violence. The attempted mass political assassination of dozens of Republicans and their staff by an MSNBC viewer and Bernie Sanders supporter, a guy named James Hodgkinson, testifies to the risk of irresponsible media commentators using inflammatory language. It is serving to radicalize a mob. Underneath it all, Vladimir Putin is getting exactly what he hoped for: chaos, disillusionment with the political system, and possibly the worst division in America in generations. But more than that, utter contempt for almost half of America for their president. This isn't entirely the doing of Putin. He needed help. Democrats and the news media have given him that help, and they are leading those disappointed Hillary voters and never Trumpers, Republicans, just like lemmings off a cliff. For the great vocal majority, I'm Tony Codispoti. Please subscribe to the podcast and also visit and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks very much for listening. Take care, everybody.